Hi guys, and welcome back again. Okay, so I've had quite a night, as you can imagine. It's been very difficult to sleep. It is getting very difficult now to bind things together. I mean, well, to bind them with history, to bind them with the circumstances, or with the development. Okay, but I will try. I will try to give you a tiny little bit of interpretation or the pattern that I see. Okay, and whether you can see it too. Let's see if you can see it as well. So this is where I kind of like. So we went through the Semitic ones, the Semitic template form. That mind that seems to be looking for the absolute, right? So templates. So these templates are robust. They do not change. You can change something inside or even above, or maybe add something to convey a different meaning. But that I'm questioning whether this was the time when we were creating duality. This was the first time when there was black and white, full and empty. God and not God, kind of. So they were becoming dualistic. I don't know. Or maybe dualistic was a bit later. Maybe in fact dualistic. No, yes, now, yeah. See, now I'm mixing and trixing. It's because I'm reflecting on it, and it takes a little bit of time. Okay. It will bind up. It will bind up, and you guys probably have a better grip on history than I do, but it doesn't really matter because I don't need to know the details of history. I only need to know what is happening inside the body, and that will kind of like explain that history. Yeah, it's very simple. So we're going from the root out, not looking at the consequences and then going in, looking at what is happening to this person. No, we're going inside the person, and then we're looking at his mind or her mind, and then we're seeing why history went the way it did, right? Because history has gone one direction. We're all familiar with it, so we can see where it has gone. We have become more and more intelligent. We are growing in intellect. We're not growing in intelligence per se, because intelligence is actually finished. Yes, this is a bit strange, but intelligence is consciousness, it's life, right? So that life is finished. Now life is living as different forms and learning more and more about itself. But in essence, it is finished. The body may not be finished. The body will continue and evolving and changing according to what we're doing and what we want it to perform for us, kind of. Like, the first animals who learned to fly, they really wanted to fly, like clearly, or, well, they wanted to jump and escape and jump and jump and jump. And then with time, they would actually be able to fly, right? Or they would just use the drift when they were like, if they didn't weigh much, they started using the drift, and then they began flying, right? So they had to wish or want it, kind of. They had to have that will to wish to fly, or to manage it, or to be able to perform that action that they wanted, that would elicit that ability that they would be able to fly. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now I am noticing that I am sharing a lot here. Okay, I'm sharing a lot here, and I'm going in and out. So I get it that this will be a bit difficult. This will be a bit difficult because we're now going into the nitty-gritty. But okay, now let's go back. Okay, so let's say that no, they did not create duality. That the Semitic grammar was in fact was in fact closer to the sensory experience, right? Say that the Semitic one, because they saw an idea, right? Like there was a horse, and then they would change that word inside that would elucidate another meaning, but they would not add something, or yeah, they would not go around it to convey that message, meaning that the horse does not stand alone. It stands together with the rest of us, so that they saw things as they were, not as they thought of them, like we began doing in Europe. In Europe, we began internalizing this knowledge, and this would create this duality, this dual way of looking at things, right? Half full, half empty, or black and white, tall and short. We would become more distinguishing. We would distinguish now more. We would look for nuance and look for specificity, because our mind was that way. We had developed. So we too share that old mind, the Semitic mind, and also the older one before that, which was without that root pattern at all, right? When there was no root pattern, when we didn't look for knowledge in that way, because that, oh god, now I'm really messing it up for you. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, because I'm going in and out. Okay, there are two. It seems as though there are stages to our development. Okay, let's just begin now from the beginning. There are stages of development. We realize something, right? We realize our own existence. That came first. We must have, right? And that was in the context of mom and dad, right? Yes. And then we would assign sounds to that, but it would go quite far until we began conceptualizing it, or analyzing. We had to develop analysis. Analysis had to develop, and it wasn't there obviously in the beginning. So we had to learn philosophizing. We had to learn a lot, meaning that we had to learn a lot about the sensory world first, which is probably where the pyramids and everything comes in, that we were able to do those things. We were able to do those impossible feats back then because we were, first of all, we were one with nature and each other. We perceived ourselves as a unit. Everyone was part of everyone. So even our minds, when we thought of something, we were like thinking about it in union, because there was nothing else in our minds. There literally wasn't anything, right? We didn't know anything. So we were just these innocent people that really wanted to know about the stars, or know about things now. Because remember that the reason why I'm falling on the stars, and why even stars are kind of preceding mom and dad, is because the stars are the reason why we began walking up, standing. Why we got up and started to walk. We were looking at the stars, like the trees, trees going up towards the light, the plants, everything is going toward the light. So we were looking at stars, and we were wondering what they were. And this got us up. We were like this all the time, looking up, 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 So when we saw Dad, probably back then, he was looking up all the time, wanting to know what is happening, what is happening. Right. Okay. So this is now where it's so nuanced. We don't know now, right? This is just myth. Everything that I'm telling you now is kind of myth, but it's also factual because it happened, but we don't know when, we don't really know how. But what we can see is the reason how or why we can follow this development is because of the fact that grammar and morphology is kind of like the body of that. So if we follow that, then we would see different types of frameworks, different types of cognition or discernment. And this discernment would obviously lay the foundation for how we communicate. It was essential, right? It was. So, but I don't know what each grammar represents cognitively, but I'm trying to explain. So for instance, we have the Semitic one that is robust, right? The kutiba does not change. It's always there, which is why in Europe we have the ablaut. Ablaut changes. It kind of like doesn't have that robust root template. It doesn't have a template. It kind of has a template because those letters are always there, but they can be stacked. So I did like an error in the last video where I said leave, which would have been wrong because, or will, sorry, love, because then we would have changed the consonants and they didn't because they have kataba. Kataba stands, right? It stands. It does not change. We can change something inside or in front, but the consonants kataba stay. Whilst in Europe, they also stayed, but not as robust. They were now getting not so robust anymore. And I don't know if this is now where we step away from God or believing in God or the absolute, because we had kind of like realized the absolute first. And then maybe imagination was developing further, or the mind was developing further, and this would now begin doubting our connection to life, to God, because we would be afraid of the dark, and this darkness would creep in. The howls of wolves and the animals, the bears, and then the dark forests of Europe, because Europe was very dark, super dark. It is the reason why we called it upa, because that is where we saw darkness. We didn't see that type of darkness anywhere else because there wasn't that big of a forest so close to us, right? Because we came from the Mediterranean Sea, pretty much, on Middle East, which had a very different climate. So, so there was less sun in Europe and a lot of water, tons of rain, a lot of clouds all the time. We had never seen that, not to that extent. So now we're seeing that this new change of environment is creeping into our psyche. We're now starting to doubt the absolute, or the absolute is not longer so absolute anymore. Something has changed in Europe. Something is changing in Europe. And this change would now start creeping in, right? And changing our morphology. Now things are not so straight, rooted, like the Semitic grammar. Now we're becoming more ablaut, and we're becoming more fusional. We're fusing now, right? Now we're talking about pre-Latin era, pre-Latin time. So now we're talking about the times when the myths began coming in. and these different types of myths. Okay, so there were some myths coming in, and different gods, the Greek gods, all these gods, and prophecies and oracles, seers. There is this different type of experience that is being had now in Europe, right? That was not happening in Middle East. They were very united in their devotion to the absolute. But we were not now. We were drifting off because we created these other gods, and then we created philosophy much later. Though philosophy came later because Aristotle inherited the Greek gods and stuff. Like he learned about it when he was a kid, so that those stories were old, right? Yeah, and what we're seeing is, so this is now where I don't know what is happening. Because is our imagination growing so that we begin calling phenomena for gods? Like thunder is now a god, and fire is a god, and water is a god, and earth is a god. Or was that now because of that inheritance from the Semitic mind, but that we continued on? Right? Because we didn't settle with only God is, and only God is absolute, so God is everything. We did not settle with that. We now began calling everything God, and which would lay the foundation for, which was driven by that whole need to deduce, to know the details, to be precise, which is meshiptu, right? Shiptu means to be precise. So we're naming things. Even this, I found the word shiptu in Slovenia. That means to the point. So apparently they have adopted an old Illyrian word, right? Albanian word in Slovenia today, which in Albanian means to articulate, to recite, to articulate, to pronounce. But over there it means to the point, right? So we were now getting more and more to the point. The reason why I'm wondering, see, this is now the crazy thing. So Zeus and Hades and all these Greek gods, right? I am wondering now whether they all came during the Egypt period. Okay, because we hear about these gods, but in truth, they must have been either knowledge or like an idea. They were like talking about an idea, but they called it God, right? Like a phenomenon. Like they were afraid of thunder, so they were like, "Oh, that's the thunder god," you know. We mustn't be afraid. We mustn't angry him. He will, throw thunder at us. Or, or, or that they perceived themselves as God. That Zeus was actually a man, like very long time back. But because of the fact that the psyche, the imagination hadn't developed properly, we couldn't distinguish between what was imaginary and what was physical. Okay? We couldn't distinguish that, so that if I imagined a thunder and threw it at you, then you as the recipient would not know whether that was real or not. So you would have been very afraid. You'd be like, "Oh my God, he's throwing thunder at me." So you would have just started running, right? Getting as far away as possible, right? So there was someone who was developing first. Someone was developing the intellect first. And these people began using it against the masses, the dumb ones, the slow ones, right? They're not slow, they're not dumb. It's just that the ones who grew fastest became also very arrogant and selfish and exploitative of the good in the remaining family. They did, which is why they kind of made themselves God, or that's how they perceived themselves, because in essence they were, because they were developing imagination first, and they were able to imagine something, to hold an idea. They held the thunder first. The other ones could not imagine thunder. They had seen it, but they couldn't imagine it, hold it, internalize it. They had never internalized a thought. Someone had to internalize a thought first, and those were the ones who became elites, right? And they became gods. They now began having these powers. They could throw things. They could curse you forever, rah, right? They would do these things. They would say them, and it would scare the living hell out of you because you didn't know, right? You would have never known what is the truth. And if something bad happened to you, which eventually it would, because you would die, right? Or you would get ill or something, right? And you would automatically blame it on that person who cursed you. Because you had never seen that before. That was not in our experience. We had never seen someone curse. We had never seen anger. We had never seen cunningness. We had never seen these faces. We had never seen them. Remember, we came from this one family. We had never seen imagination. Someone had to imagine things first. And that person, he would have now great power. He really would have great power because that power separated him from the remaining ones in the group. Now he was much more intelligent and he could imagine things and even invent things because he could imagine things. So they would follow him and he would be a god. But he would then, with time, though, make those other ones not gods. They were gods too, but they were just not developing as fast as him. He was jumping ahead. And that jump later on with time created worse people. Like the kids of those successful ones would become worse and worse and worse because they didn't. It wasn't necessarily that they too learned everything that their grandfather learned, right? But it kind of also was because they inherited that mind. This is now when it gets a bit scary, kind of where intelligence is now, thankfully though, the world has become global. So now we're learning, everybody has mixed and tricks where the mind is being mixed now for the first time, which is also, I got a bit afraid yesterday because I was like, listen, what if now, because what we're revealing is kind of like the psychology of man and all these groups. And if it gets in the wrong hands, obviously people can use it against people, right? So if I know your psyche, I can manipulate you, right? If I know all your triggers, I can manipulate you. That is what companies are doing today. That is what Facebook is doing. That is what YouTube is doing. Everybody's doing it in one way or another, right? That they're using our psyche against us, our body, our biology against us. Yeah. Okay, so, but I don't think that it will be. I don't think that it will be that scary or that big of a threat. I don't think anybody will find it, honestly, and I don't think that they will grasp it that fast. And those who have are already using it against the people, so that this won't be a hocus pocus thing. Okay, but now let me just go into now the video. Okay, the chat GPT, and let me just show you some examples of my thoughts. Right. Okay, so again, just to show you what I'm doing, this approach is a substrate first, morphology second, grammar third, right? The inverse of traditional comparative linguistics, which usually starts with morphology. Indeed. So what we're doing is we're making a map of cognition, of mind, of language, because the mind and language are connected. We made language later though. we have to have some sort of understanding first. And it is this one we're kind of tracing, meaning that we're really back in the time of myth, right? Okay, so now let's just look at these big families, because I asked you to gather all these families and then make a map of their morphology type. And then we're going to look at it, okay? So we have these ones, Afroasiatic. These are the old ones. This is the old mind. Mostly root pattern with some concatenation in non-Semitic branches. Sure. Uralic, agglutinative. Agglutinative means gluing. They're just gluing stuff together and mixing it up. But they have vowel harmony. Share some basics morphemes with the PIE via possible prehistoric contact. Yes. In fact, we share quite a lot of words, right? Remember that these morphemes have spread, which is why they exist everywhere, but every people have began using them within their own framework, so that they began creating new words with that root, which then now seems unrelated, but it's not. It is actually related, but it is in deep time. It is related quite far back in time, right? So obviously, everybody who looks at this now will think that this is hocus pocus, but it's not. And then, well, yes, we go on. We have the altaic ones, the Turkic ones, agglutinative, minimal internal alternation. So they don't change so much inside. They are more like us in Europe. Could reflect a substrate where morphology drifted towards stacking suffixes. They began using things like us. Is this is this a result of European conquest or European mind going there, and then they got that mind, they got the idea of how something is understood from that perspective, or someone learned both languages? Because remember now that what we're seeing is that each language represents a psyche, a unique psyche, a unique nervous system and brain, because these are the same, right? Nervous system, brain is the same thing. It's just that this is here and the rest of it is in the gut, and then it is spread out to your body. Okay. Which it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense that these people could have gotten it from that they were part of it a long time back, right? Of this type of mind. Yes. Because we see that, right? So say that we have a center where we originated from, and then we spread. So the ones who went the furthest away but did not develop, those would inherit the old mind. Meaning now that maybe the Sino-Tibetan, since it's just tone-based, it is very primitive. Like, it is super primitive. Sino-Tibetan is very primitive. Mostly isolating. We need to go into the nitty-gritty of it, right? Remember, I'm not a linguist. I'm a psychologist. I'm a neuroscientist. So I'm learning a lot about it now. But it will take a little bit of time, and then I will get it, and then I will share it with you. But we're seeing someone learning something first. Everybody was not learning everything. Somebody was just learning. Someone just got the first knowledge, and then they spread. But those who stayed behind continued developing, it seems. And then they reached the stage, and then they spread. And then, but the ones now they had moved those before they spread, and then now this would create a new civilization again, a new paradigm shift, and then that will spread. So now we're seeing this layer on layer cognition, meaning that the further back we go, we need to actually go and find those who left the nest first and who didn't develop linguistically, right? Like seemingly the Sino-Tibetan people. I don't know, but we will look at it. It is very likely, because one of them, I saw a video about the Chinese, that they did not have an equivalent language to English, because it is not concatenative, right? It's non-concatenative, and it is basically tone-based. and isolating. So each tone means something now. So they have not separated themselves at all. Like they're one with nature still. They're just like saying tones to state something or where I am going, kind of. It's not even I, it is just going. They're just going. They're just eating, drinking. See, they probably don't even have time or location or gender or anything. It's just the action or even, right? So we're talking about the old, right? Remember? So for you guys who know Mandarin and stuff now can explain this better than me, but I saw that the modern Mandarin had to actually adopt a lot of the grammar from Japanese because the Japanese language had developed much more. They could actually conceptualize an idea better than the Mandarin one, which is why Mandarin had to actually develop the whole writing, kind of the mind of the Japanese people to change their language so that they could learn like them. Isn't that crazy? So the language was inhibited by some fundamental rules in their architecture. So if my mind, if I can't communicate it, I do not understand it, pretty much. That is what is being said here. And the more primitive or the more general my words are, the less nuance and specificity I understand and can convey. Okay. Yes, okay. So if we accept your theory, we'd expect lexical echoes of the same ancient morphemes across unrelated families. Yes. Preserved in basic words for body parts, kinship, natural elements, inflections. Yes. Morphology diverges patterns that track with shifts in cognitive social structures, from clan-based oral tradition to centralized bureaucracies to philosophical codification. Wow. Wow. This is beautiful. This is beautiful. This will revolutionize how we understand everything. Okay? Yeah. Intermediate languages in other regions that preserve older mixed morphological traits. Yes. Now we're also going to include the Ainu, the Burushaski, which probably obviously has, this is like the inheritance from the Alexander the Great. We have heard about these people, even their word, buru, man. And then we have Kusunda, Nepal, and Sumerian, right? Semitic. Obviously, this is in relation. And this is also when we see, this is before Sumerian. Well, we will see, okay? But in all cases, isolates often preserve older morphological systems, vocabulary from an earlier regional substrate. Yes. And it is this that we are kind of following and looking for. And then we have features that don't matter later cognitive morphological. Yes. Oh, sorry. This is also what makes us more distinct, right? But also what may be the trait that we inherited before we diverged. So this is exactly what your framework predicts. They're survivors of pre-divergence or parallel divergence stages. Yes. Some historical linguists have tried to connect Indo-European. Sure, they have tried, but they couldn't because they did not understand understanding. If you want, I can now. So this is the difference between a linguist and me. A linguist can tell you the grammar in much better way than I can, and more precise perhaps, because I'm not as precise. You can see that sometimes. However, well, I endeavor to be as precise, okay? but they can't explain to you why that grammar happened. Why did they begin creating that grammar and not the other, like someone else? And that is what I am looking at. I am looking at what made them diverge. And then it is making me like this a global cognitive morphological spectrum of language families, right? Okay, so he's making these isolating ones are over here. So now we're seeing that these might have split very early on, okay? The Vietnamese, the Sino-Tibetan ones, very early on. And that maybe they did not learn to speak at all, and that they learned it in stages from other people. We don't know. We don't know now, okay? We don't know. We don't know if everyone began speaking, because it has not been developed everywhere. We see that still in native places. Speech has not been developed. Okay. And then we have these ones, agglutinative, it's there, and then fusional, and then root pattern. Albanian is kind of like in the middle there, but it is also agglutinative. Okay, so it's not really a good map. This is not a good map. It's trying, but there are so many factors now that we can't plot it like this. We have to like plot it in a circle. A circle would be a better plot, because then we can see all the layers and where they are and where they're mostly concentrated. But these are now very many factors, right? Okay, so what languages are considered not non-concatenative? Yes, I went through this with you, right? It's telling us like what is concatenative, and then now what isn't. No, sorry, just the non-concatenative. And then the Turkic and the Sino-Tibetan one, it is explaining them, sit in a very different spots on the morphological spectrum, and neither is truly non-concatenative in the Semitic sense. They're mostly concatenative, but in different ways. So the Turkic ones are strongly agglutinative and concatenative, so they did come in contact with those people who became concatenative, who became conceptual, that is. Okay, conceptual. Agglutinative can be, remember that agglutinative can be actually the form that predates Semitic, or that drifted from the Semitic form, right? Yes, because agglutinative, well, yes, or a blot. Maybe I'm mixing now with a blot. Maybe it is a blot. Wait, okay. Because agglutinative is the gluing one, right? Where each thing means something, and they put them all together to say something, to convey that message. But in it, it's not the grammatical meaning, the tenses and the cases and the persons. They're added. They're add-ons, right? But they can change something as well. Geldi, gelese. Okay, no, so yeah. This is a modular construction. Sorry, this is a modular construction. It's very European-like, much like Indo-European fusional system, but with cleaner boundaries. So this is very, very Indo-European. Same mind. Did they get this mind from Indo-Europeans, and then implemented that into their toolkit of sounds, which then created new words? Perhaps. Sino-Tibetan languages, mostly isolated Mandarin, some agglutinative tendencies, Tibetan Burmese. Okay, words are typically monosyllabic morphemes combined to form compounds. Very little morphology, right? Very little morphology now. We're very simple here, super simple. No vowel alternations to encode grammar. Shu, my shu, wu, wo, my, le shu. Okay, I obviously don't speak Mandarin. But le marks completed aspect. Now le marks a completed aspect. Again, le, finish, leave, no. In the Semitic, no. So now this word is root in the Chinese language, because it's marking a completion, a finish. A no, a let go, a leave. So it is being used differently, okay? Even more isolating, pure root morphemes, context determines syntax. Sure, okay, fine. So we have lots of stuff now, but I have given you a lot of it. But now let's sum it. We're seeing, well, I have summed it as well. What we're seeing is a divergence, and we're tracking this divergence. It seems that the Sino-Tibetan group diverged before both the concatenative and non-concatenative forms were created or emerged. We don't know whether these psycholinguistic forms of expression were spread via conquest and migration and then later adopted into their lexicon, or whether they too were part of this proto-lexicon that diverged and later adopted or created new grammar, new forms, new minds. Yes. Okay. So yeah, so that was it for now. I think we passed quite a lot of time. So that was it for now. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. It is my honor, my pleasure, my greatest joy. And yes, have a good day or evening wherever you are.